Lyra struggled to her feet, her body still weak from the crash but stronger than the previous day. Ember chirped in alarm, sensing the tension in both beings. The microdragon leapt from his cushion to Lyra's shoulder, his injured wing still bound, but his instincts fully alert. Kate grabbed a rifle from the wall and a smaller weapon which she tucked into her belt. Through the window, Lyra could see a black vehicle moving slowly along the dirt road that led to the cabin. The design was different, from Kate's truck, more angular with darkened windows. The sight triggered memories of covert operations she had observed on other worlds. Government agents coming to investigate the unknown. Lyra spoke into the translator. "Why help me? You could surrender. Me to your authorities, gain reward or recognition." Kate checked the rifle, then replied through the device. "I know what governments do with things they don't understand. I was military. I saw. Their secrets have secrets. Trust me, you don't want to be in a lab." The human moved to a bookcase and pulled on a hidden lever. The entire shelf swung outward, revealing a narrow tunnel cut into the mountain behind the cabin. Kate motioned for Lyra to follow. The assassin hesitated only briefly before entering the passage. The human had earned a measure of trust, and Lyra had few alternatives. The tunnel was roughly hewn with support beams at intervals. A string of small lights illuminated the path. Kate sealed the entrance behind them, plunging them into dim light. They moved quickly through the passage. Lyra noted the construction, recent but not new. The human had prepared this escape route long ago. Another sign that Kate Miller was no ordinary forest ranger. After several minutes of walking, the tunnel opened into a small cavern. A basic camp was established there. Another exit visible at the far end. Kate moved to a metal cabinet and removed what appeared to be communication equipment. She activated a device and studied its screen. Her expression, grim. 6 people at the cabin, heavily armed special ops, not regular military. They came prepared. She spoke through the translator. The crash must have triggered sensors. They expected to find something. Not human. Lyra nodded, understanding the situation. All advanced civilizations had protocols for first contact, usually involving containment and study, often dissection. The Sylvan Dominion was no different, though they rarely bothered with species as undeveloped as humans. She activated her translator. "Must reach my ship. There are items I need, weapons and communication technology." Kate shook her head. "They will have found it already. It's the first place they'd look after seeing the crash trajectory." The human was correct, of course. Lyra had been thinking tactically, but her injury had slowed her strategic planning. She needed to recalibrate her approach. She was on an unfamiliar world without resources, facing an unknown threat. Her neural implants flickered as she attempted to access combat protocols. The biotech responded weakly, but provided enough enhancement to sharpen her senses. "We need to move away from populated areas. Find a location where I can attempt to send a signal." Lyra said. Kate considered this, then activated a map display on her device. She pointed to a mountain range several units of distance away. Their radio observatory remote. Minimal staff. Powerful transmission equipment. We could use it to boost whatever signal you need to send. But it's 3 days hiking through rough country. Ember chirped from Lyra's shoulder, his scales shifting to an anxious yellow. He sensed her concern. The microdragon had always been attuned to her emotions, a genetic modification designed to create a perfect partnership between assassin and companion. Now his anxiety mirrored her own. They gathered what supplies they could carry and prepared to exit through the cavern's second tunnel. Kate explained that it would lead them away from the cabin toward a river where they could mask their trail. The human moved with confidence through the wilderness, her knowledge of the terrain providing an advantage Lyra had not anticipated. As they emerged from the tunnel into forest, the sound of helicopters echoed in the distance. The human government was expanding its search. The hunt had begun. They traveled until nightfall, moving steadily through increasingly dense forest. Kate led them along game trails and shallow streams to minimize tracks. The human demonstrated wilderness skills that impressed. Even Lyra, who had tracked targets across 100 worlds, Kate Miller was clearly more than a simple forest ranger. Her military background had provided training that now proved invaluable. When darkness made further travel dangerous, they made camp. In a small protected hollow, Kate built a minimal fire using techniques that produced almost no smoke. She shared dried food with Lyra, and even had small pieces of meat for Ember. The micro-dragon had taken to the human completely, now perching on her shoulder as often as on Lyra's, a development the assassin found both irritating and oddly comforting as they sat beside the tiny fire. Kate asked questions through the translator about Lyra's world and species. The assassin provided vague answers, revealing little of strategic value. It was standard procedure when dealing with lesser-developed civilizations. Yet as the night progressed, Lyra found herself sharing more than protocol would permit. Something about the humans' direct gaze and lack of fear encouraged honesty. Lyra's people, the Sylvan, lived for centuries. Their technological advancement had come at great cost. The bioengineering that gave them extended lives and enhanced abilities had also altered their emotional capacity. Attachments were discouraged. Loyalty was to the Dominion, not to individuals. The perfect society they had created was efficient, but cold Kate listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated surprising insight. For a primitive being, she grasped complex concepts quickly. When Lyra mentioned the war with the Void Collective, the mechanical beings that threatened Sylvan expansion, Kate immediately understood the implications. A war between organic and artificial intelligence, the human said. She stared into the small fire. Your people fear becoming obsolete. Lyra had never considered it in those terms. The Dominion propaganda described the conflict as necessary for survival, the mechanical threat to organic life. But Kate had identified the underlying fear with unsettling accuracy. The assassin found herself reevaluating her understanding of human intelligence as night deepened. Kate took first watch, allowing Lyra to rest and continue healing. The assassin's body was recovering, slowly, her natural regeneration hampered by damaged neural implants. She drifted into uneasy sleep, memories of her failed mission surfacing in dreams. The peace advocate she had been sent to eliminate. The moment of hesitation that had changed everything. Lyra woke suddenly, alert to a change in her surroundings. Kate was kneeling beside her, finger to her lips in the universal signal for silence. The human pointed to Ember, who stood rigid on a nearby rock, his scales glowing bright red, a warning. The micro-dragon sensed danger approaching. They doused the fire and gathered their supplies, moving quickly and silently into the underbrush. Within minutes they heard the sound of voices, human voices moving through the forest. A search party had tracked them. Despite their precautions, Kate led them to a small stream, and they waded into the cold water, moving downstream to break the scent trail. She had clearly evaded pursuers before. The next day brought new challenges. The forest began to thin as they approached more traveled areas. Kate explained that they would need to cross a road used by humans for recreation and travel. They would be exposed briefly, but it was the fastest route to the mountains and the radio observatory. They waited until midday, when Kate assured Lyra that traffic would be minimal. The human insisted that Lyra wear clothing she had brought from the cabin, a hat to cover her pointed ears and gloves to hide her luminescent skin. Ember was tucked into a backpack with small air holes, his protests ignored by both beings as they prepared to cross the open area. Kate suddenly stiffened. She pulled Lyra down into the underbrush just as a vehicle appeared. It was not the expected tourist or traveler, but another black government vehicle moving slowly along the road. The human agents were expanding their search perimeter, setting up roadblocks and patrols. They retreated back into the forest. Kate, consulting her map for alternative routes. The detour would add a day to their journey, but they had little choice. The human government was committing significant resources to the hunt, more than either of them had anticipated. We need to understand what we're dealing with, Kate said that evening as they made camp in a hidden ravine. Who leads this operation? What do they know about you? Lyra considered the question. Her implants might provide an answer. If she could access them fully, she placed her hand on the biotech visible at her temple and attempted to initiate a deep scan. The effort sent pain shooting through her skull, but yielded results. The implants activated briefly, allowing her to process ambient electronic signals, government communications, security classifications, names, fragments of information assembled into a coherent picture. Agent Diane Clark heads the operation. Lyra said Black Operations Specialist, former intelligence, multiple first contact protocols activated. They know I'm not human, but little else. They found my ship have begun. Analysis. Kate nodded as if confirming a suspicion. I know her by reputation. Brilliant, ruthless, completely dedicated to national security. She won't stop. She's hunting you personally by now. The revelation changed their situation. The human government had assigned their best operative. The search would be methodical and relentless. Lyra had faced such opponents before on developed worlds. The cabin was simple but functional. A single room with a wood stove, beds, and basic amenities. Lyra had modified the structure, adding security measures and communication equipment salvaged from various human sources. Kate had been impressed by how quickly the alien assassin adapted human technology, creating systems far beyond current Earth capabilities. Ember thrived in the mountain environment. His wings had fully healed, and he spent hours soaring above the peaks. His size had increased noticeably, a development that surprised even Lyra. The micro-dragon now stood as tall as Kate's knee, his wingspan nearly 2 meters. The alien explained that Ember was entering a growth phase typically triggered by specific conditions in sylvan environments. Something about Earth, perhaps the atmosphere or magnetic field, had accelerated the process. Kate and Lyra spent their days establishing routines. The human taught the alien about Earth wilderness, survival, hunting, fishing, identifying plants, and reading weather patterns. Skills that required no technology but proved essential. Lyra in turn shared knowledge of stars, galactic geography, and aspects of sylvan culture deemed safe for human understanding. They developed a comfortable partnership based on mutual respect and growing trust. The neural connection between them strengthened with practice. They discovered they could share sensory information across short distances, Lyra experiencing the world through human perception, Kate glimpsing the enhanced awareness of a sylvan assassin. The experience proved enlightening for both beings, highlighting fundamental differences in how they processed reality. One evening, as they sat beside a small fire outside their cabin, Kate asked the question that had been building for weeks. Do you regret warning your people about Earth? Instead of calling for rescue, Lyra watched Ember circling overhead against the backdrop of stars. The micro-dragon could now produce controlled energy bursts from his mouth, a defensive capability that had fully manifested during their journey. The sight reminded her of how much had changed since the crash. The Sylvan Dominion would have destroyed everything that makes this planet worthy of protection, Lyra replied. They would have seen humans as resources, not beings with value. The capacity for compassion that you showed me would have meant nothing to them. I cannot regret protecting that. Kate nodded, accepting the answer. She had come to understand much about Sylvan society. Through their conversations, the rigid hierarchy, the coldly logical approach to expansion, the view that other species existed merely to serve Dominion interests. It reminded her of ideologies she had encountered during her military service. The kind that justified any action in pursuit of their goals, but there was another reality they both understood. The transmission Lyra sent would not go unanswered. The warning would not deter the Sylvan Dominion. It would accelerate their interest in Earth. A planet with beings compatible with their neural technology represented a significant strategic asset. The revelation that a high-ranking assassin had gone rogue to protect such a world would trigger immediate response protocols. They had prepared as best they could. Kate had contacted trusted former colleagues, sharing heavily edited information about potential extraterrestrial threats. Small groups within human military and scientific communities now worked on defensive technologies, based on Lyra's guidance. Nothing that would truly stop a Sylvan invasion force, but enough to demonstrate that humans would not be conquered easily. Lyra had done what she could to prepare Earth while being careful not to provide weapons technology that humans might use against themselves. The balance was delicate. She gave them defensive shields, communication scramblers, and early warning systems, but kept planet-destroying capabilities and genetic weapons from human hands. Some lines she would not cross their quiet existence changed on a clear autumn night. Ember returned from his evening flight in obvious distress, his scales pulsing bright red, a warning both beings had learned to heed. The micro-dragon landed with unusual force, vocalizing in the complex patterns that Lyra understood as language. "They have come," he communicated. "The ships orbit beyond your moon, watching, waiting." Lyra stepped outside, scanning the night sky. Her enhanced vision could detect what human telescopes would soon discover: the faint distortion of starlight that indicated cloaked vessels in high orbit. A Sylvan reconnaissance fleet. 5 ships based on Ember's description, standard protocol before colonial assessment. Kate joined her, sensing the change through their neural connection. The human had grown increasingly sensitive to Lyra's emotional states. Another unexpected development in their unusual bond. "How long do we have?" Kate asked, her voice calm, despite the gravity of the situation. The former combat medic had faced death many times. This was simply a larger-scale threat. "Days, perhaps a week," Lyra replied. "They will observe first, assess military capabilities, communication systems, power grids. They are thorough." Kate nodded and went inside, returning with communication equipment they had prepared for this moment. She began the process of alerting her contacts, coded messages that would trigger prearranged responses around the globe, subtle preparations, defensive positions, activation of the shield. Technology Lyra had helped develop, nothing obvious enough to provoke immediate Sylvan attack, but enough to demonstrate readiness. Lyra watched the human work with efficient precision. Kate had proven repeatedly that humans were far more capable than Sylvan intelligence had indicated. The species' adaptability, creativity, and determination represented qualities the Dominion consistently underestimated. The same qualities that had led Kate to save a crashed alien assassin, rather than fear or destroy her. "There is another option," Lyra said finally as Kate finished sending the alerts. "I could surrender myself, return to the fleet, offer information in exchange for leaving Earth alone." Kate turned to her, expression unreadable in the darkness, but the emotional surge through their neural connection was unmistakable. Concern, anger, determination. They would never honor such a deal. Kate replied, "They would extract everything you know, then proceed anyway, and you would die. For nothing." The human was correct, of course. The Sylvan Dominion did not negotiate with traitors or lesser species. Lyra had known this from the beginning, had accepted the inevitability of confrontation. The moment she chose to warn Earth rather than betray it, she had committed herself to this path. 3 days passed with increasing tension. Ember reported more ships arriving, a larger fleet than standard reconnaissance warranted. The Sylvan were taking the situation seriously, perhaps recognizing the strategic value of humans with compatible neural patterns. Lyra intensified her efforts, helping Kate modify the defensive shields to withstand heavier weapons on the 4th night, as they worked on communication equipment designed to coordinate global defenses. A new signal appeared, a direct transmission on a secure Sylvan frequency, one that only the highest-ranking Dominion officials could access. Lyra recognized the signature immediately and felt cold dread settle in her chest. "The Supreme Commander has come," she told Kate. "The fleet is not reconnaissance. It's invasion." Kate absorbed this information, her expression grim but determined. "We knew this might happen," she said. "The plan doesn't change." Their preparation had always been for this possibility. A coordinated global response using modified Sylvan technology to demonstrate that humans would not be easy conquests. The strategy relied on showing enough resistance to make invasion costly without revealing all their defensive capabilities. The goal was negotiation from position of strength, not outright victory, which remained impossible. Given the technological gap, Lyra activated the receiver, allowing the Sylvan transmission to play. She translated for Kate as the formal announcement. From the Supreme Commander filled the cabin. "Assassin Lyra Moonshadow. You stand accused of treason against the Sylvan Dominion, abandonment of mission, unauthorized contact with lesser species, sharing of restricted technology. Your immediate surrender is required. Resistance will result in planetary sanction. Standard language. Exactly as protocol dictated. The threat to Earth explicit but measured." The Dominion preferred intact resources when possible. Destruction was inefficient. Lyra prepared a response, but Kate placed a hand on her arm. The neural connection between them flared with sudden intensity. The human had an idea, one that flashed through their shared consciousness with startling clarity. It was unprecedented, dangerous perhaps, impossible. But it offered something no defensive strategy could, a chance to change the fundamental dynamic between species. We need to show them what they don't understand. Kate said, "Let me speak to them. Through you. Through our connection. Let them see what they refuse to acknowledge." Lyra hesitated. The proposal was radical. Using their neural bond to allow a human to communicate directly with the Sylvan Supreme Commander violated every protocol of the Dominion. It would expose Kate to significant mental strain, possibly permanent damage. But the human was right. The Sylvan needed to experience what Lyra had discovered, the capacity for compassion, cooperation, and sacrifice that made humans unique among species. They had encountered. They prepared, carefully, Lyra modifying the transmission equipment to amplify their neural connection. Kate meditating to strengthen her mental focus, Ember positioned outside as guardian, his new abilities, providing an extra layer of security. They could not prevent orbital bombardment, but they could defend against immediate ground assault if the transmission failed. "We need to understand the security before we move," Kate whispered. She handed Lyra a pair of binoculars, another human tool that the assassin found surprisingly effective, despite its primitive design. Lyra scanned the compound, counting guards and noting positions. 8 visible security personnel, 2 at the entrance and others patrolling the perimeter, all armed with standard human weapons. The larger threat came from the electronic surveillance cameras mounted on buildings and motion sensors along the fence line. A basic security system by Sylvan standards, but effective enough given their limited resources. Kate produced a small device from her pack. It resembled the communication tool they had been using, but with additional components attached. The human explained that it could detect electronic signals and provide information about security systems. Another military tool she had kept from her service years, Lyra was continually surprised by the resources this seemingly simple forest ranger possessed. According to the scanner, the facility ran on its own power generator with a backup system. They operated independently from the main power grid, a standard precaution for sensitive installations. Kate explained that disrupting both power sources would trigger emergency protocols, diverting security attention and possibly creating an opportunity to enter. They spent the day observing the facility, noting patrol patterns, staff changes, and security protocols. The human agents maintained strict routines, a tactical mistake that made their movements predictable. Lyra identified 3 potential entry points, weaknesses in the perimeter where the terrain created blind spots in the surveillance system as evening approached. Kate shared the last of their food with Lyra and Ember. The micro-dragon had recovered significant strength, his injured wing now capable of limited movement. He perched on a branch above them, his scales shifting between colors as he maintained his own vigilance. Their companion had proven surprisingly useful during their journey, alerting them to search parties and finding safe paths through difficult terrain. While they ate, Kate asked the question that had been building since their escape. From the cabin, "Why are you running from your own people?" Lyra considered how much to reveal. The full truth was complex and potentially dangerous, yet this human had risked everything to help her. An unprecedented act that deserved some measure of honesty. "I was sent to kill someone," Lyra finally said, "a member of my species who advocated peace with the Void Collective. The mechanical beings we fight against. He believed coexistence was possible, that the war was unnecessary. I was to eliminate him, make it look like collective assassins. This would strengthen war sentiment among my people. But when the moment came, I could not complete the mission." Kate absorbed this information, her expression unreadable. The human had her own experiences. With morally questionable orders, Lyra could see the recognition in her eyes. "So you became a traitor because you chose not to kill?" Kate said, "It wasn't a question. The Sylvan do not tolerate failure, especially from their most effective weapon, Lyra, replied. I was designed for one purpose. When I failed at that purpose, I became useless. Worse, I became a liability. I know too much about Dominion operations. Kate nodded, understanding the implications. You said designed, not trained. Lyra hesitated, then decided to share the final truth. I am not fully natural. My species uses biotechnology to enhance abilities. I was created to be an assassin. Genetic modifications, neural implants, sensory enhancements, all to make me the perfect killer. The perfect weapon. Instead of the revulsion Lyra expected, she saw compassion in the human's eyes. Kate reached out briefly, touching Lyra's arm, a gesture of solidarity that felt alien yet somehow comforting. Weapons can choose their targets. Kate said simply, sometimes, the most important order is the one you refuse. As darkness fell, they finalized their plan. Kate would create a diversion at the power station located half a kilometer from the main facility. While security responded, Lyra would enter through a maintenance access point and make her way to the primary transmission dish. She would need approximately 20 minutes to reconfigure the equipment to send a signal strong enough to reach Sylvan communication networks. What will you tell your people? Lyra Kate asked as they prepared to separate. The human had proved insightful again, identifying the question Lyra had been avoiding. I don't know. Yet Lyra admitted, the truth. Perhaps that would be new for me. They moved into position as clouds covered the moon. Providing additional darkness, Ember would remain with Kate, serving as an extra set of eyes and warning system. The micro-dragon had protested this arrangement, but eventually settled on the human's shoulder. His scales a determined blue. Lyra watched from the tree line as Kate disappeared into the shadows, moving toward the power station. The human moved with impressive stealth. Another skill from her military past. Minutes passed in tense silence before a sudden explosion illuminated the night sky. The primary generator erupted in flames, a precisely calculated blast designed to cause maximum disruption with minimal risk. Personnel alarms blared across the compound. Security personnel rushed toward the fire vehicles, mobilized, and chaos erupted exactly as planned. Lyra moved quickly, taking advantage of the distraction. She reached the fence undetected and used a tool Kate had provided to cut through the links. Within moments, she was inside the perimeter, moving between buildings, avoiding the remaining security cameras. The main control building stood 3 stories tall with glass windows illuminated from within. Lyra could see technicians responding to the emergency, some rushing outside, others attempting to stabilize systems. The assassin entered through a side door left unguarded in the confusion. Her enhanced vision allowed her to navigate the darkened corridors, avoiding the few humans who remained at their stations. She located the transmission control room on the 2nd floor. Just as Kate had described, based on publicly available facility plans, the room was empty. The technicians having responded to the emergency elsewhere, Lyra moved to the main console, examining the primitive but functional technology. Human computing systems were basic compared to Sylvan technology, but the principles remained similar. Lyra connected fragments from her neural implant to the human equipment, creating an interface between incompatible technologies. Her fingers moved rapidly across the controls, rerouting power and reconfiguring transmission parameters. The system resisted at first human safeguards attempting to block unauthorized access, but such barriers were insignificant to someone who had infiltrated the most secure facilities across 12 star systems. As she worked, Lyra became aware of another presence in the room. She turned to find a human female standing in the doorway. The woman was tall, with short gray hair and eyes that conveyed dangerous intelligence. She wore a black uniform without insignia and held a weapon pointed steadily at Lyra. Agent Diane Clark. I presume, Lyra said, using the translation device Kate had given her. The human nodded, a slight movement that conveyed both confirmation and confidence. I expected someone more alien-looking, she replied. You could almost pass for human with the right makeup, but the skin gives you away, the luminescence. Fascinating. Lyra assessed her options. The human blocked the only exit but appeared to be alone. The weapon she held was likely designed to incapacitate rather than kill, standard protocol when capturing a valuable specimen. The transmission was nearly ready, requiring only final activation. But escape would be difficult. Agent Diane Clark, Special Sciences Division. The woman said, "I'm authorized to offer you asylum in exchange for technology and information about your species." A fair exchange. Lyra recognized the approach. A common tactic when dealing with potentially valuable assets: offer cooperation before resorting to force. She had used similar methods herself when infiltrating planetary governments. "I know about the ship we recovered." Clark continued. "Impressive technology. Your companion as well. The small dragon-like creature, biological engineering beyond our current capabilities. We have much to learn from each other." The transmission console beeped softly, indicating readiness. Lyra needed to activate the final sequence, but doing so would alert the human. The assassin calculated trajectories and movement speeds, determining that she could reach Clark before the human could fire. Her enhanced reflexes, though weakened, remained superior to human capabilities. "What will you offer?" "The Forest Ranger," Clark asked, changing tactics. Kate Miller, former combat medic, discharged after questioning orders during a classified operation in Eastern Europe. She harbored an alien fugitive. That's treason. The mention of Kate shifted Lyra's calculations. How did Clark know about Kate? The power station diversion should have provided anonymity. "Unless we captured her 20 minutes ago," Clark said, reading Lyra's expression. She was quite resourceful, almost escaped, but not quite. The small creature fought impressively, injured 2 of my men before we contained it. Lyra felt something unfamiliar. Cold anger mixed with concern. Emotions she had been engineered to suppress now surged through her system. The neural implants at her temple flared with sudden energy, responding to the emotional spike. She made no outward movement but inwardly prepared for combat. "What do you want?" Lyra asked, buying time. While she assessed the new situation, "Information," Clark replied. "First about you and your species. Then about why you're here, the real reason. And finally about what threatened you enough to make you run." The human was intelligent, asking precisely the right questions. Lyra recognized a worthy opponent. Someone who... The night sky above the Appalachian Mountains lit up as something tore through the atmosphere. A streak of blue fire carved its way downward, leaving a trail of smoke and sparks behind it. The forest creatures fell silent as the object crashed through, the ancient trees sending splinters flying in all directions before finally coming to rest in a small clearing. Inside the damaged spacecraft, Lyra Moonshadow struggled to regain consciousness. Her luminescent skin flickered with fading light as she forced her eyes open. The cabin was filled with smoke and the control panel sparked with damaged circuits. She reached up to touch her pointed ears, feeling the warm trickle of violet blood. Her long silver hair was matted against her face, and her once pristine combat suit was torn in several places. Lyra was no stranger to crash landings. As the most feared assassin of the Sylvan Dominion, she had survived worse. But this time was different. This time she had nowhere to go and no one to call for help. She had failed her mission. The high official of the opposing faction remained alive, and now Lyra was branded a traitor. A small chirp came from beneath the control panel. Ember, her micro-dragon companion, crawled out from his protective compartment. His scales glowed a dull red instead of their usual bright orange, signaling his distress. One of his wings bent at an unnatural angle. Lyra reached for him with a gentleness few would believe possible from an assassin of her reputation. She had eliminated targets across 12 star systems without hesitation or mercy. But the sight of her injured companion filled her with concern. The tiny dragon nuzzled against her palm as she carefully examined his wing. "We are done, my friend," she whispered in her native tongue, the melodic sounds filling the damaged cabin. "We failed and now we die on this primitive world." Lyra had studied humans from afar. The Sylvan Dominion considered them barely worth noticing. A young species on a resource-rich planet, they were marked for eventual colonization, but nothing more humans had yet to achieve faster than light travel. They knew nothing of the vast interstellar war between the Dominion and the Mechanical Void Collective. They lived their short lives in ignorance of the greater universe. With effort, Lyra pushed open the damaged hatch of her spacecraft. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and soil. The forest around her was dense and dark. The moons of her homeworld would have illuminated such darkness, but this planet had only one small moon, partially hidden by clouds. She gathered Ember in her arms and stepped out onto Earth soil for the first time. Her legs buckled beneath her as her neural implants flickered. The technology that enhanced her strength, speed, and senses was failing. The crash had damaged more than just her ship. She managed to drag herself and Ember a short distance from the wreckage before collapsing against a tree trunk overhead. She watched the stars through gaps in the canopy. Somewhere up there was her homeworld, a place she would never see again. The Dominion did not forgive failure. Lyra had been their perfect weapon until she hesitated at the crucial moment. She still did not understand why she had been unable to complete her final mission. Perhaps after centuries of taking lives, something inside her had finally broken. Ember curled against her chest, his small body shivering. Lyra stroked his scales, feeling the life force pulsing. Within him, dragons were sacred on her world. This one had been genetically engineered to serve as both companion and weapon, a creature of legend reduced to a tool for assassination. Much like herself, as the hours passed, Lyra drifted in and out of consciousness. Her body began the process of shutting down, conserving energy for a rescue that would never come. Her skin grew paler, the natural glow that marked her species fading to almost nothing. The forest around her remained eerily silent, as if the native wildlife sensed the alien presence in their midst. The eastern sky had just begun to lighten when Lyra heard the first human footsteps. At first she thought it was a hallucination, but the sound grew closer, crushing leaves and snapping twigs. Lyra tensed her hand, moving to the energy blade at her hip out of habit, but she lacked the strength to draw it. She could only wait as the footsteps approached her position. A human female emerged from between the trees. She wore sturdy boots, green pants, and a jacket with patches on the sleeves. Her brown hair was pulled back, revealing a face marked with small scars and lines of experience. She carried some kind of pack on her back and held a device in her hand that emitted a steady, beeping sound. The human stopped abruptly when she spotted Lyra, her eyes widening with shock. She spoke words that Lyra's translator implant was too damaged to process. The human took a step back, then seemed to reconsider. She slowly approached her, hands raised in what Lyra recognized as a universal gesture of peace. Lyra watched the human through half-closed eyes. She had no strength left to fight or flee. Whatever this human intended, she could not prevent it. The human knelt beside her, maintaining a cautious distance. Her eyes moved from Lyra's pointed ears to her luminescent skin, then to Ember, who hissed weakly from his position in Lyra's arms. Kate Miller had been a forest ranger for 5 years after leaving her position as a combat medic. She had seen many strange things in these mountains, but nothing like this. The woman before her was clearly not human. Her skin had a faint glow that pulsed with her breathing. Her ears tapered to delicate points, and her silver hair seemed to shimmer, despite the dirt and blood that matted it. The small creature in her arms looked like something from a fantasy novel, a tiny dragon with scales that shifted color as it breathed. Kate had been tracking the object that fell from the sky, expecting to find a meteorite or perhaps satellite debris. Instead, she found something that would change everything. She thought she knew about the universe, against all her training and better judgment. Kate moved closer. She had sworn an oath to help those in need, human or animal, and while this being was neither, she was clearly suffering. Kate reached slowly toward the injured creature in the woman's arms. Lyra watched with confusion as the human female examined Ember with gentle hands. The micro-dragon was too weak to resist. The human spoke again, her voice soft and her expression showing concern, not fear or disgust. Why would this primitive being show concern for aliens who crashed on her world? The human reached into her pack and removed a small container. She opened it, revealing a clear gel which she carefully applied to Ember's injured wing. The dragon flinched, then relaxed as the substance seemed to provide some relief. The human then turned her attention to Lyra. She offered a container of water, holding it to Lyra's lips. Lyra hesitated, then accepted the water. It was cool and clean. She had not realized how thirsty she was. The human continued to speak, and though Lyra could not understand the words, the tone was reassuring. The human pointed to herself and said a word repeatedly. Kate. The assassin had studied thousands of beings across the galaxy, learning their weaknesses in order to eliminate them more efficiently. She had never considered learning about humans beyond the basics needed for potential missions to their world. Now she found herself face to face with one who was showing her compassion. The human called Kate made a lifting gesture, then pointed toward a direction in the forest. She seemed to be offering assistance. Lyra considered her options, which were few. She could remain here and die. She could attempt to repair her ship with no resources, or she could accept this unexpected help from a species she had been taught to dismiss. Ember chirped weakly, looking up at Lyra, then at the human. His instincts had always been good. If he sensed no threat, perhaps there was none. With the last of her strength, Lyra nodded her acceptance. The human smiled, a simple expression that somehow conveyed more genuine emotion than Lyra had seen in centuries among her own kind. Kate Miller helped the alien woman to her feet, supporting her weight, as they began the slow journey through the forest toward her cabin. Kate had no idea what she was getting into, but she could not leave this wounded being and her strange pet to die. She had seen enough death in her time as a medic, as the sun rose over the Appalachian Mountains, casting golden light through the trees. The most feared assassin of the Sylvan Dominion leaned on the shoulder of a human. The species she had considered primitive had shown her something her own advanced civilization seemed to have forgotten: simple kindness. For the first time since she could remember, Lyra Moonshadow felt something other than duty or regret. She felt hope. I've written part 1 of The Alien Assassin Girl had given up until a human reached out to her in the style you requested. The story is written in third person, uses simple English, and avoids punctuation marks as specified. The word count is approximately 1,000 words, and I've kept the narrative engaging while establishing the main characters and setting. The story introduces Lyra Moonshadow, the alien assassin with her injured micro-dragon Ember, and Kate Miller, the human forest ranger who discovers them. I've focused on building the initial connection between these characters and setting up the premise for the rest of the story. Would you like me to make any adjustments to part 1? Or would you prefer I continue with? The forest thinned as they approached a small clearing. A simple wooden structure stood nestled against the mountainside. A vehicle Kate had called a truck was parked nearby, and smoke rose lazily from a stone chimney. Kate guided Lyra up 3 wooden steps and through a door into the warmth of the cabin. Inside, the space was modest but comfortable. A large fireplace dominated one wall, while the opposite held shelves filled with books and strange objects Lyra recognized as human artifacts. A small kitchen area occupied one corner, while a desk covered with papers and electronic devices sat in another doorway, likely led to sleeping quarters. Kate helped Lyra to a couch covered with soft blankets, then moved quickly around the cabin gathering supplies. Her efficiency reminded Lyra of field medics she had encountered during Dominion military operations. The human worked with purpose, but her movements lacked the cold precision of Sylvan healers. There was something almost gentle in her. Lyra watched through half-closed eyes as Kate filled a bowl with water and gathered cloth bandages and containers of medicine. The alien assassin remained alert despite her weakened state, assessing potential weapons and escape routes out of habit. The knife block in the kitchen, the hunting rifle mounted above the fireplace, the heavy tools beside the wood stove. All could be weapons if needed, yet the human made no threatening moves. Kate knelt beside the couch and gestured toward Ember's injured wing. The micro-dragon hissed weakly, but Lyra nodded, giving permission. Kate carefully took the small creature, examining the damaged wing with experienced hands. She spoke softly as she worked words Lyra could not understand, but the tone was soothing. Ember gradually relaxed, his scales shifting to a cautious yellow. The human applied a clear substance to the dragon's wing, then fashioned a tiny splint from what appeared to be wooden sticks and cloth. She worked with surprising skill, for a species Lyra had been taught was primitive. When she finished, Kate offered Ember a small piece of meat which the dragon sniffed suspiciously, before consuming in a single bite. Next, Kate turned her attention to Lyra's wounds. She hesitated, pointing to the torn combat suit, then to Lyra's injuries, indicating she needed access to treat them. Lyra understood, and began removing the upper portion of her suit, revealing several deep cuts across her shoulders and chest. The human gasped at the sight of Lyra's luminescent skin, but quickly recovered her professional demeanor. As Kate cleaned and dressed the wounds, Lyra studied her face. The human appeared to be in her 4th decade of life, young by Sylvan standards, but mature for a human. Her face bore small scars that spoke of past hardships, and her hands moved with the confidence of someone familiar with injury. Her eyes, though, held something Lyra rarely encountered: genuine concern. When Kate finished treating the visible wounds, she pointed to her own head, then to Lyra. The universal gesture for asking about head injuries. Lyra touched the neural implant, visible at her temple, where the skin had torn, revealing the biotech beneath. The implant flickered with weak blue light, damaged but not destroyed. Kate leaned closer, examining the strange technology with curious eyes, but made no attempt to touch it. She simply nodded and moved away, giving Lyra space. The human brought a container of water and what appeared to be food, some kind of soup with chunks of vegetables and meat. Lyra hesitated. The Sylvan digestive system could process most carbon-based foods, but she had never consumed Earth cuisine. The smell, however, was surprisingly appealing, and hunger overrode caution. She accepted the offering. Kate sat in a chair across from Lyra, watching as the alien cautiously tasted the soup. Seeing no adverse reaction, the human seemed to relax slightly. She spoke again, gesturing to herself, then to the cabin around them. Lyra assumed she was explaining something about her home, or perhaps why she lived alone in the wilderness. After finishing the meal, Lyra felt strength returning to her limbs. The food, while simple, had provided needed nutrients. Her body had begun its healing process, though without functioning neural implants it would take far longer than usual. Ember, too, seemed improved, curled on a cushion near the fireplace, his scales now a more healthy orange, though his injured wing remained immobile. The day passed, with both beings observing each other. Kate occasionally checked Lyra's wounds or offered more food and water. Lyra maintained her vigilance, watching as the human went about her tasks. She noted how Kate regularly looked out windows and checked what appeared to be security monitors, a behavior that suggested caution, perhaps even hiding. The forest ranger was isolated by choice. Lyra recognized the signs, having encountered many beings who sought solitude across the galaxy. As evening approached, Kate prepared a sleeping area for Lyra, transforming the couch with blankets and pillows. She pointed to herself, then to another room, indicating where she would sleep. The arrangement gave both beings space, and Lyra the ability to move freely, a gesture of trust the assassin found surprising. Night fell, and with it came silence. Lyra lay awake on the couch, Ember sleeping soundly beside her. For the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to fully assess her situation. Her ship was damaged beyond repair. Her neural implants were failing. Her connection to the Sylvan Dominion was severed. She was stranded on a primitive planet with a human who inexplicably showed her kindness. Lyra had spent centuries as the perfect weapon, a being without attachments or weakness. She had eliminated countless targets without hesitation. Yet when faced with her final mission, she had failed. She still did not understand why she had been unable to kill the peace advocate. Perhaps after centuries of taking lives, something fundamental had changed within her. A sound from outside the cabin interrupted her thoughts. Lyra tensed her hand, moving to where her energy blade would normally be. She realized with frustration that the weapon remained. In her crashed ship, Kate appeared in the doorway of her bedroom, instantly alert. Her reaction time was impressive for a human. She carried a small handheld weapon as she moved silently to a window. The sound came again, closer this time. A large animal. Moving through the underbrush, Kate relaxed visibly, lowering her weapon. She whispered something that sounded like deer, then returned to her room. The incident confirmed Lyra's suspicion. The human was accustomed to danger, always ready, always watchful. They were more alike than either would admit. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through windows. Lyra woke to find Kate already moving about the cabin. She had changed into clean clothes and was preparing food. The smell of what Lyra would later learn was coffee filled the air. Ember chirped happily from his cushion, his scales now a bright, healthy orange, though his wing remained splinted. Kate approached with a small device in her hand. She pointed to it, then to Lyra, miming talking. The human was offering some kind of communication tool. Lyra examined it, recognizing basic technology, similar to devices she had encountered on other developing worlds. She took the device and with careful movements began reconfiguring its internal components. Kate's eyes widened as she watched Lyra dismantle and rebuild the device in minutes. Using fragments of her damaged translator implant, Lyra created a rudimentary communication interface. When she finished, she activated the device and spoke into it. "My name is Lyra Moonshadow." The device translated her words into English with a mechanical tone. "I am in your debt for your assistance." Kate's face registered shock, then wonder. She spoke into the device, her words converting to the melodic language of the Sylvan Dominion. "I'm Kate Miller, forest ranger and former combat medic. You and your pet crashed in my forest. I couldn't leave you there," Lyra corrected her. "Ember is not a pet, he is a companion. A genetic construct, but sentient." Kate nodded, accepting the correction. She asked the question Lyra had been expecting. "Where are you from?" The assassin considered her response carefully. She was trained to reveal nothing to lesser species. Yet this human had saved her life and Ember's, a debt that could not be ignored among her people. She decided on a partial truth. "I come from a system you would call Lyra after your constellation. My people are the Sylvan. We travel between stars." The human accepted this information with remarkable calm. She asked, no questions about technology or weapons. Instead, she asked, "Are others looking for you?" Lyra felt cold dread at the question. "Yes, but not to rescue, to execute. A traitor is what they would call me." Kate seemed to understand the gravity of these words. Her next question surprised Lyra. "What did you refuse to do?" The assassin stared at the human. How could this primitive being so quickly discern the heart of her situation? Lyra remained silent, unwilling to reveal more. The human did not press further. Instead, she said simply, "I understand running from something you couldn't do. I was a combat medic. I know about orders that break something inside you." For the first time, Lyra truly looked at Kate Miller. She saw beyond the human exterior to the being. Beneath, she recognized the shadows behind the eyes, the vigilance, the isolation. These were traits of a warrior who had seen too much, one who had walked away. As the morning progressed, they established a fragile trust. Kate explained that her cabin was remote by design. Few people came to this part of the forest. She had chosen isolation after leaving military service. The human did not elaborate, but Lyra understood without words. Ember surprised both of them by approaching Kate. He had always been wary of strangers, yet he climbed onto the human's lap and allowed her to examine his injured wing. Kate spoke softly to the micro-dragon as she adjusted his splint. Her